The French foreign minister called it a stab in the back. The French ambassador to Australia compared it to Pearl Harbor. And President Macron recalled his ambassadors from both Canberra and Washington in a diplomatic tantrum not seen between Western allies since the Suez Crisis. The Australian decision to cancel France's $90 billion submarine contract and join AUKUS with Britain and America didn't just end a defense deal. It shattered French delusions about European relevance in the Indo-Pacific and proved that when real security matters, Australia chooses the Anglosphere over Europe every single time. And 3 years later, France is still seething because AUKUS represents everything Paris fears most. A world where French power doesn't matter and where the serious nations exclude Europe from decisions that will shape the century. Welcome to Doctrine of War, where we analyze the strategic realities that destroy comfortable illusions about power and influence. France's opposition to AUKUS goes far beyond wounded pride over a cancelled contract. It represents French recognition that Australia, Britain, and America have created an alliance structure that explicitly excludes European nations and makes clear that Indo-Pacific security will be determined by countries willing to actually confront China, not by nations that prioritize trade deals over strategic interests. Today we're examining exactly why France opposes AUKUS with such visceral intensity, what this reveals about European strategic irrelevance in the Pacific, and why Australia was absolutely right to choose nuclear submarines and Anglo partnerships over French promises. And what you're about to discover is that France's anger isn't about betrayal, it's about being exposed as a second-tier power that talks about global influence but can't deliver when it actually matters. The submarine humiliation, why France lost the contract it thought was guaranteed. To understand French rage about AUKUS, you need to understand the sheer scale of humiliation involved in losing what France considered the defense contract of the century. In 2016, Australia selected French company Naval Group to build 12 attack-class submarines based on France's Barracuda nuclear submarine design, but modified to use conventional diesel-electric propulsion. The contract was worth $50 billion initially, eventually ballooning to estimates exceeding $90 billion. The largest defense contract Australia had ever signed and one of the biggest submarine deals in global history. For France, this wasn't just a commercial success, it was validation that French defense technology competed with American and British offerings and that France remained a trusted partner for countries seeking alternatives to Anglo-American dominance of defense markets. The program was a disaster from the start, though Australian officials were too polite to say so publicly until after cancellation. Costs exploded far beyond initial estimates, with some projections suggesting the program could ultimately cost over $100 billion for 12 conventional submarines, more expensive per boat than American nuclear-powered Virginia-class submarines that are far more capable. Delivery schedules slipped repeatedly, with the first submarine originally scheduled for late 2020s being pushed to mid-2030s and potentially later. And the technology transfer that Australia was promised, the sovereign capability to build and maintain submarines independently, was being jealously guarded by French companies that wanted to maintain dependence rather than building genuine Australian capability. But the real problem wasn't just French commercial failures, it was the growing recognition in Canberra that conventional diesel-electric submarines, no matter how advanced, simply couldn't meet Australia's strategic requirements for operating in the vast distances of the Indo-Pacific against an adversary as powerful as China. Conventional submarines must surface or snorkel regularly to recharge batteries, limiting operational range and creating vulnerability when operating thousands of kilometers from Australian bases in hostile waters. Nuclear-powered submarines can remain submerged for months, transit at high speeds for unlimited distances, and operate with persistence that conventional submarines cannot match. As Australian threat assessments of China became increasingly serious, the mismatch between French submarines and operational requirements became untenable. The AUKUS announcement in September 2021 blindsided France because Australian officials conducted negotiations with America and Britain in absolute secrecy, deliberately excluding France from knowledge that the submarine program was being reconsidered. French officials learned about AUKUS cancellation not through diplomatic channels or even a courtesy phone call. They learned by watching news broadcasts like everyone else. The diplomatic protocol violation was deliberate and brutal, because Australian leadership concluded that France would try to sabotage any alternative arrangement if given advance warning, using pressure through EU channels and leveraging every political connection to prevent Australia from escaping a program that served French interests far more than Australian security needs. The French reaction was apoplectic in ways that revealed just how much this mattered to French strategic self-conception. France didn't just protest the cancellation. France recalled ambassadors, threatened trade retaliation, accused Australia of betrayal, and conducted a diplomatic campaign to isolate and punish Canberra for having the temerity to prioritize Australian security over French commercial interests. French Foreign Minister Jean-Yves Le Drian called it unacceptable behavior between allies and partners, as if Australia owed France something beyond the contract penalties that Australia agreed to pay. French politicians compared Australia to Trump-era America: unstable, unreliable, not worthy of trust. Language that revealed French fury at being treated as a second-tier partner rather than an equal. If you're starting to see why French opposition to AUKUS is rooted not in legitimate security concerns but in wounded national pride and commercial disappointment, you're understanding exactly the kind of alliance dynamics that Doctrine of War exists to analyze. We examine why nations make the strategic choices they do and what those choices reveal about actual power versus pretensions. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because what we're about to show you about French strategic irrelevance in the Indo-Pacific will make clear why Australia was absolutely right to exclude Europe from this alliance. The technology comparison makes the Australian decision to abandon French submarines even more justified. The attack-class boats were to be modified Barracuda-class submarines stripped of their nuclear reactors and converted to diesel-electric propulsion, essentially taking sophisticated nuclear boats and making them less capable to satisfy Australian political reluctance at the time to operate nuclear-powered vessels. This made no engineering sense. The Barracuda hull was designed around nuclear propulsion, and converting it to conventional power created awkward compromises that reduced performance while increasing complexity and cost. The boats would have been larger and heavier than purpose-built conventional submarines while lacking the range and endurance that made nuclear submarines valuable in the first place. Australia was paying premium prices for submarines that were compromised by design. The comparison to what AUKUS provides shows how much Australia benefits from the switch. Instead of French conventional submarines delivered in the late 2030s at best, Australia will receive American Virginia-class nuclear attack submarines in the early 2030s, boats that are already operational, proven in service, and represent the most capable attack submarines in the world. These aren't experimental designs or modified compromises. These are frontline American submarines being transferred to Australian service because the strategic value of Australian nuclear submarine capability outweighs the cost of reducing American submarine numbers. And longer term, Australia will build SS and AUKUS submarines using British nuclear propulsion technology with American combat systems, creating sovereign capability that far exceeds anything the French program would have provided. The sovereign capability question deserves particular emphasis because this was supposed to be a key benefit of the French program but was being undermined by French commercial interests. Australia wanted technology transfer that would allow Australian industry to build, maintain, and upgrade submarines independently, creating jobs and expertise in Australia rather than maintaining permanent dependence on French suppliers. But French companies resisted genuine technology transfer, wanting to maintain monopoly on critical systems and components that would ensure continued lucrative support contracts. The AUKUS arrangement provides genuine technology transfer including nuclear propulsion secrets that only 6 nations possess. Britain and America are sharing technology with Australia at levels that France never offered because France was never willing to actually build Australian independence. The strategic messaging that AUKUS sent to France was deliberately brutal. When serious military capability is required for real security challenges, Australia chooses American and British partnerships over French alternatives every time. This isn't a subtle diplomatic nuance. This is an explicit statement that Anglosphere defense cooperation is a premium tier while French partnerships are optional commercial relationships that can be terminated when better options emerge. For a nation like France that maintains self-conception as a global power and permanent UN Security Council member with independent nuclear deterrent, being categorized as a second-tier partner is psychologically devastating. France's entire post-World War II identity is built around the fiction that France remains a great power whose voice matters in global affairs. AUKUS destroyed that fiction by demonstrating that when Australia had to choose, France wasn't even considered a serious alternative. The strategic exclusion. Why Europe doesn't matter in Indo-Pacific security. French opposition to AUKUS extends beyond just the cancelled submarine contract to encompass fury at being excluded from an alliance structure that will shape Indo-Pacific security for decades. AUKUS isn't just about submarines. It includes Pillar 2 cooperation on advanced technologies including hypersonic weapons, artificial intelligence, quantum computing, cyber capabilities, and electronic warfare. This technology cooperation creates three-way partnership on the most advanced military capabilities being developed, with information sharing and joint development that excludes European nations including France. For France, which prides itself on defense industrial capability and technological sophistication, being excluded from this cooperation while Australia participates represents an intolerable demotion in the hierarchy of trusted partners. The Five Eyes intelligence alliance that underpins AUKUS creates information sharing at levels that France has sought access to for decades but been consistently denied. The Five Eyes partnership between America, Britain, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand represents the most intimate intelligence cooperation in the world, sharing signals intelligence, satellite coverage, and analytical products at levels that even NATO allies don't access. France isn't in Five Eyes and never will be, because the trust and integration required for that level of cooperation depends on shared language, compatible legal systems, interoperable intelligence agencies, and historical partnership that France simply doesn't have with the Anglosphere. AUKUS makes explicit what was previously implicit, that strategic partnerships in the Indo-Pacific will be based on Five Eyes core with potential expansion to Japan and others, while European nations remain peripheral observers. The Indo-Pacific strategic environment reveals why French opposition to AUKUS is based on European misunderstanding of the region's security dynamics. France claims status as Indo-Pacific power because of French overseas territories in the Pacific including New Caledonia, French Polynesia, and various smaller islands. These territories give France exclusive economic zones and some military presence, but they don't make France a serious Indo-Pacific security actor. France cannot meaningfully contribute to Taiwan's defense, cannot sustain naval presence in South China Sea against Chinese opposition, and cannot provide the kind of military capability that actually matters for deterring Chinese aggression. France's Indo-Pacific presence is colonial remnants, not strategic capability, and AUKUS makes clear that Australia, Britain, and America recognize this distinction. The China policy divergence between France and Australia explains why Canberra concluded that French partnership on Indo-Pacific security was worthless. France under Macron has pursued strategic autonomy, that in practice means trying to maintain profitable economic relationships with China while occasionally making vague statements about human rights or rule of law. When China imposed economic coercion on Australia, banning Australian exports and threatening Australian interests, France continued deepening trade ties with Beijing and refused to support Australian positions. When Australia called for investigation into COVID-19 origins and faced Chinese retaliation, France remained silent. This pattern demonstrated that France prioritizes Chinese market access over solidarity with democratic partners facing Chinese pressure, making France an unreliable partner for serious security cooperation against China. The military capability gap between France and serious Indo-Pacific powers makes French opposition to AUKUS particularly absurd. France operates one aircraft carrier, the Charles de Gaulle, which spends significant time in maintenance and cannot sustain continuous deployment. Britain operates two Queen Elizabeth-class carriers that can maintain presence while France's single carrier undergoes maintenance. America operates 11 supercarriers plus amphibious assault ships that are larger than most nations' carriers. Australia is building capability to operate in contested Indo-Pacific waters through submarines, advanced destroyers, and F-35 fighters designed specifically for high-end combat. France's military is designed for African interventions and European defense, not for sustained operations against peer adversaries like China in the Western Pacific. French capability gap means French participation in Indo-Pacific security cooperation would contribute little while complicating command structures and decision-making with partners who don't share French strategic priorities. The NATO friction that French participation would create provides another reason for AUKUS to exclude Europe. France famously pulled out of NATO's Integrated Military Command in 1966, pursuing strategic independence that complicated alliance operations for decades until France partially rejoined in 2009. Even now, France pursues policies that diverge from NATO consensus, questions American leadership, and generally acts as if French interests supersede alliance solidarity. Britain and America have no interest in allowing France to bring these dysfunctional dynamics into Indo-Pacific security cooperation where unity and interoperability are essential for effective operations. AUKUS works precisely because all three nations share compatible strategic cultures, operate similar equipment, and prioritize effectiveness over institutional politics that plague European defense cooperation. The economic dimension reveals French opposition is partly about protecting defense industry market share rather than legitimate security concerns. France is a major defense exporter that competes with American and British companies for contracts across the Indo-Pacific region. AUKUS technology cooperation between Australia, Britain, and America creates three-way defense industrial integration that excludes French companies and potentially leads to Australia, Britain, and America standardizing on compatible equipment that leaves French systems incompatible and unwanted. The submarine cancellation eliminated not just the initial contract value but potentially decades of support contracts, upgrades, and follow-on work. The French defense industry sees AUKUS as an existential threat to market access in a region that represents some of the largest defense budgets outside North America and Europe, and that's why French opposition is so intense and sustained. The political symbolism of AUKUS exclusion matters as much to France as the practical implications. France has cultivated self-image as a nation that punches above its weight through diplomatic skill, cultural influence, and strategic autonomy that allows France to play great powers against each other. Being explicitly excluded from AUKUS while Australia, a nation with half France's population and smaller economy, participates as an equal partner with America and Britain destroys this self-image. It demonstrates that in security domains that actually matter, France is considered a less valuable partner than Australia. For French political culture built on ideas of French exceptionalism and historical greatness, this is an intolerable psychological blow that no amount of aircraft carriers or nuclear weapons can compensate for. The future expansion of AUKUS represents an ongoing threat to French interests and explains why Paris continues opposing the alliance years after initial establishment. Japan has expressed interest in AUKUS cooperation, particularly on technology sharing and potential submarine technology transfer. South Korea, India, and others may seek similar partnerships. Each expansion of AUKUS cooperation reinforces that serious Indo-Pacific security architecture is being built around Anglosphere core plus select Asian partners, while European nations including France remain excluded. This is the nightmare scenario for French foreign policy. A world where European voices don't matter in shaping security orders in the world's most strategically important region. That's today's analysis of Doctrine of War. If this examination of French opposition to AUKUS revealed the wounded pride and strategic irrelevance driving French fury, let us know in the comments. Was Australia right to dump France for better submarines and better partners? Does France have any legitimate claim to Indo-Pacific security leadership? And if you want more analysis of alliance politics, defense industry competition, and the strategic realities that expose national pretensions, subscribe and turn on notifications. We're covering the conflicts between what nations claim to be and what they actually are. French opposition to AUKUS ultimately reveals Europe's fading relevance in global security affairs. When the serious business of deterring Chinese aggression and maintaining Indo-Pacific security is at stake, European nations including France simply don't have the capability, commitment, or strategic alignment necessary to contribute meaningfully. AUKUS makes this explicit rather than maintaining comfortable fiction that European voices deserve equal consideration in regions where European power doesn't reach. France can maintain colonial territories in the Pacific, deploy occasional naval vessels for freedom of navigation transits, and issue statements about rule of law and multilateralism. But when Australia had to choose between French commercial interests and genuine security partnerships with nations willing and able to help defend Australia against existential threats, the choice was obvious. France lost not because Australia betrayed France, but because France couldn't offer what Australia actually needed, and AUKUS is the alliance that makes that uncomfortable truth impossible to ignore. Until next time, stay strategic.